Would you recognize the sound of the end of the world? It doesn't sound like a bomb exploding, nor the roar of a missile. Sometimes, it's just the dull click of a button. A solitary red button on a cold table in a windowless room. It was this sound, this almost silent sound, that nearly wiped out humanity in 3 seconds. 3, 1, 2, 3, and the world would have turned to dust. But, by some miracle of consciousness, the button was released. The apocalypse was suspended and everything went on as if nothing had happened, as if we weren't, literally, one breath away from extinction. It was an ordinary night, too ordinary. The kind of night no one would remember, if it weren't for what almost happened. The general was alone. The light was dim. On the other end of the phone, the voice of Supreme Command shouted, "Attack detected. Confirm launch." The screen flashed with red alerts. Digital maps showed enemy warheads entering the airspace. Everything indicated they were under attack, everything except his intuition. The man with the key. The man with the power to decide whether the world would live or die. Within seconds, his fingers trembled on the panel. His hand sank to the button. The protocol activated. But then something inside him broke the script. He stopped the sequence, disarmed the system, cancelled the end of the world, and breathed as if he had just returned from the dead. This man wasn't a politician, he wasn't a diplomat, he wasn't a messiah, he was just a general, trained to obey. But in that moment, he disobeyed. And this silent disobedience may have saved millions. It's not an exaggeration, it's reality. In a world with thousands of nuclear warheads ready to launch, with automated systems that respond in milliseconds, with alerts that don't wait for a second opinion, the only thing that prevented hell ... was human judgment. It was fear, it was doubt, it was the courage to stop a finger in mid-flight, an attitude that wasn't in the manual. But who was this general? Why did he hesitate? What did he see that the radars missed? This story isn't just about weapons, it's about the value of doubt, about the cost of haste, and, most importantly, about the danger of entrusting world peace to automatic protocols. Because if, that day, the button had been held down for 3 more seconds, perhaps we wouldn't even be here talking about this today. Smoke would have engulfed the planet, cities would have turned into craters, and our children would be just a memory that never happened. Have you ever stopped to think how many times the world almost ended and you didn't even know it? How many decisions were made by people we'll never meet, in rooms we'll never see? People who, with a simple gesture, held the fate of billions. This is one of those stories, and it's real. And if you think this all sounds like something out of a movie ... then brace yourself, because what comes next is even more terrifying, more human, and more timely than it ever should be. Stop and think. What if it was you in that room? Would you press the button, or would there be time to let go before the 3 seconds? Imagining the past is like opening a jammed door that creaks under the weight of memories no one wants to revisit. Let us return to a grey dawn, too silent to be innocent, when the Cold War no longer fit in diplomatic halls and began to throb in bunkers that smelled of electricity, sweat, and stale caffeine. The nuclear arms race was not born from an act of paranoia, but from a succession of fears stacked like dominoes about to fall. The flash of Hiroshima, the bloody sky over Bikini Atoll, satellites that spied on the enemy from above like metal crows. Every capital became a spark, every general a match. Industries sold fear packaged in steel. Politicians erected walls to justify extraordinary powers, and agents traded secrets like marked cards. It was a chessboard where the pieces were human lives and no one could leave the table. This dread didn't just write headlines, it twisted destinies and scratched maps with red arrows across the planet's chest. All fear has roots, and the seed of this silent Armageddon sprouted before the flash of Hiroshima. In isolated laboratories, scientists MEASURED chain reactions while politicians calculated power gains. Science soon became a commodity, and every split atom fueled national ambitions. The doctrine of mutual destruction emerged, peace sustained by threat. Imagine 2 people in a dark room, each holding a pinless grenade. That was the planet. To maintain this fragile equilibrium, radars were erected that scanned clouds, satellites that sniffed heat, computers that predicted routes in microseconds. But these machines consumed faulty data, and any reflection of sunlight seemed like a missile. Fearing second best, elites created almost automatic protocols: shoot first, ask questions later. Alarms rang, red lights flashed, officials rushed, and the decision fell to a human finger, a fusion of the blind logic of machines with the electric panic of men ready to explode at every dawn. How did we get to the room where the general pressed the button? Fast forward decades, when new warning systems promised to eliminate human error, supercomputers calculated orbits, infrared sensors hunted for any spark on the horizon, software predicted solar winds. Sounds safe, right? But each layer of technology was another fragile card in a watchtower. They called it technical comfort. In practice, it created a veil between reality and decision. One freezing dawn, a poorly planned military exercise leaked test data to real consoles. Screens flashed, sirens screamed, and a line said warheads were crossing the Arctic. The zero priority message rang out on the red phone. The general's blood ran cold. But something didn't add up. The attack seemed too small, clumsy, almost amateurish. He hesitated. High command bellowed protocol. This is no time to philosophize. Launch now. His finger pressed the button, and the planet held its breath for 3 seconds that felt like an eternity. Behind this near-apocalypse were discrete faces, contracts signed in mahogany rooms, companies whose profits grew with each degree of panic. The more warheads the rival displayed, the bigger the budget, the bigger the bonus, the longer the line of lobbyists. War, even in silence, pays dividends. Who pretended not to see? Distracted voters, pressured journalists, leaders who preached peace and turned a blind eye to the crack of missiles. Meanwhile, families in small towns lived with test sirens so frequent they became the soundtrack of everyday life. Children learned to hide under desks. Adults took out insurance that would cover nothing if the sky burned. Generations grew up with the notion that everything could be over before dinner, and this risk only failed to materialize because someone, somewhere, hesitated. A tiny gesture saved billions, but rarely earns medals. Sometimes it doesn't even become a footnote. The profits remained intact, proof that the bomb doesn't need to explode to leave scars. The darkest side of these routes is normalization. The more times the clock flirts with midnight, the less people believe it will ever ring. Fear becomes a constant noise. On the eve of the cancel button, generals reviewed spreadsheets, and ideologies were diluted in manuals. What remained was the blind mechanism, turning without noticing the absurdity. What if the phone line failed? What if the general trusted protocol too much? The sealed documents said, proceed without hesitation. No one, not even the authors of these rules, believed in their own courage to see it through. But everyone pretended, because pretending seemed less risky than admitting failure. Thus, decade after decade, the system advanced, hiding the obvious in technical language. A software error could trade sunny mornings for an endless nuclear winter, because, deep down, everyone knew all it took was one sensor failure for history to end. These roots bleed to this day. This isn't war archaeology. It's a raw wound beneath fragile treaties. Arsenals remain ready, and blind faith in technology has only grown. Companies that profited from fear now sell infallible algorithms, promising zero errors, as if zeros and ones could tame a chip failure or a solar storm. The general who released the button is called a hero, but he sleeps poorly, tormented by what he might have done to the planet. He knows what we almost lost: sunless rivers, cities turning into shadows on the asphalt, voices silenced before singing happy birthday, all because a radar mistook cloud for fire. Today he sees new powers testing hypersonic missiles and feels the same chill. Who will be the next to trust a warning? If a simple mistake was almost enough, why do we insist on playing Russian roulette with the planet? Perhaps because of the vanity of empires, perhaps because of our silence. We live thanks to 3 seconds of lucidity, and there's no guarantee the clock will grant us that grace again. Have you ever noticed how the drone of a drone over Gaza, the boom of a rocket over Kyiv, the hiss of a hypersonic missile tested in the Pacific, and the muffled click of a warhead safe in Nevada seem like noises from different worlds, yet compose the same symphony? While you listen to the rain outside your window, there are mothers burying children where the TV doesn't show it, and each warning detonation pushes up the price of bread that reaches your table. Last year, the global cost of food jumped 30%, and part of that comes from the truce that never arrives. Wheat fields become trenches. Bulk carriers sail with escorts. Fertilizers become the target of sanctions. When the general released a button, we breathed a sigh of relief. Today, we breathe inflation mixed with gunpowder. Ask the Sudanese farmers who lost crops to bombings, or the families in rural Brazil who pay the most expensive cooking gas of the decade. They felt the atomic breath even without a mushroom cloud in the sky. If war seems like statistics, look into the eyes of 6-year-old Samira, exhausted in a crowded shelter on the Polish border. Or Vasily, a 21-year-old soldier missing his right leg, clutching the diploma he'll never use. Or Li Wei, a businessman ruined after the South China Sea route was militarized. More than 110 million people are displaced. Today an absolute record, and each exodus puts pressure on schools, hospitals, jobs, and rents. It's easy to change the channel. It's hard to forget that in 2024, a single erroneous alert set off sirens in Honolulu and made 2 million residents believe they would die within 15 minutes. The collective panic became a meme, but left silent traumas. Sales of anti-anxiety medications rose 27% in the following quarter. How many hearts could withstand the real scare? The bomb that didn't explode reshapes budgets. Governments chasing their own insecurity multiply military spending. In 2025 alone, the world poured more than $5 trillion into amount capable of eradicating chronic hunger 4 times over. While schools fight for books, missile companies break stock market records. You feel this bill when the subway is late due to lack of investment, when the line at the public health system stretches for blocks, when the teacher brings chalk from home. Each missile rehearsed is a hospital that never comes into being. And there are those who profit from this. CEOs offer billion-dollar contracts. Lobbyists write speeches about freedom that become law, and so the fear factory turns. It's a market for a very specific future. It bets on the end of our own. There are impacts that don't fit into a spreadsheet. The silence of a child who learns the duck and cover exercise before spelling their own name. The nightmare of a Ukrainian driver who trembles every time the traffic light turns red. The lost look of a Japanese fisherman forbidden from sailing in the waters where he grew up, because nuclear submarines prowl nearby. In recent surveys, 64% of young people in major capitals admit to a chronic fear of nuclear war, something psychologists call atomic eco-anxiety. It doesn't show up in GDP reports, but it erodes hope, affects birth rates, and fuels extremist rhetoric. Because where there's fear, there are those who sell salvation packaged in patriotic slogans. Have you ever wondered how many electoral choices were born from a distant siren? Between 2023 and 2025, at least 9 nuclear alerts were recorded as false positives. 9 times algorithms, solar flares, or typos nearly summoned the shadow that could wipe out civilizations. 4 times there was no time for a committee. The decision would fall to an officer, alone, late into the night. But blind faith migrates from the human to the chip today. 46 strategic systems already allow for autonomous response in seconds. Would you trust your family's survival to a code that doesn't understand irony, that feels no remorse, that doesn't know the word maybe? Every security conference displays slides with terms like intelligent deterrence or accelerated decision loop. It's marketing gloss for automated Russian roulette. And so we return to the room where a finger trembled and saved worlds that never thanked him. The general grows old, his beard flecked with gray, his eyes heavy with ghosts only he sees, mushrooms that never sprouted, cities that never turned to glass. In his sleepless nights, he wonders how much time remains until human hesitation is removed from protocol. When we sign control treaties, we promise to learn. When the dust settles, we return to calibrating missiles. Do you feel that chill on the back of your neck? It comes from the same draft that shook that man's hand. Today that draft blows over AI servers in air-conditioned bunkers. If an alert goes off tomorrow, who will press cancel in the 3 seconds that define everything? And you, who will wake up early to work, will never know that the fate of the planet rested on a line of code, or an unlikely spark of doubt that may no longer exist. Imagine a board where the pieces move on their own. Spy satellites spin, software calculates trajectories, mysteries, drones fly over invisible borders, and, at the center, exhausted leaders, pressured by a clock that runs faster than diplomacy. We are at a tipping point. All it takes is a corrupted data packet for defense algorithms to interpret a cloud as a missile. Scientists at the Institute for Strategic Studies warn that, since 2022, decision time has dropped from 15 to 7 seconds in certain automated protocols, less than the length of a commercial break on YouTube. If today we only escaped because a general hesitated, tomorrow we may depend on predictive models that don't know the word regret. And when human hesitation is removed from the equation, what break will be left on the apocalypse? First scenario, the diplomatic route. It requires something as rare as pure platinum trust. Arms reduction treaties need to be reborn on tables that have been empty since in-person audits were suspended due to the pandemic. Experts like former Secretary of State Ellen Pierce advocate a double human Verification protocol. Any shot would require 2 operators in different cities, connected by video and biometrics, but politicians fear appearing fragile. Military. Personnel fear delaying their response. Corporations fear losing contracts. Even so, this path exists, illuminated by agreements that have already saved generations, such as SALT and New START. The question is, will we have the humility to admit that no country can overcome a nuclear winter? Or will we once again believe that rhetoric solves what only the courage to let go truly resolves? Second scenario, a violent escalation that begins not with warheads, but with pixels. Cyberattacks on warning systems can spoof missile traffic, trigger sirens, and provoke live fire in response to digital ghosts. In 2024, NATO researchers simulated a hack on Baltic radars. In less than 40 minutes, 15 non-existent targets generated preliminary counterattack orders. Fortunately, it was a drill. Tomorrow, it might not be. Countries invest in precision, surgical weapons as if amputating a city could be called surgery and hope. Their opponent understands the message before retaliating. But wars rarely follow scripts. All it takes is one faulty line of code, one clueless officer, one proud minister, and the dominoes fall. When the dust settles, who will count the digital corpses? Third scenario, the unthinkable a chain of errors that makes the button irreversible. Climate scientists estimate that 100 tactical detonations in urban areas would launch 50 million tons of soot into the stratosphere, reducing sunlight by up to 20%. Harvests would plummet, cold chains would collapse, and grain would become a currency more valuable than gold. The UN projects 2 billion people will go hungry within 2 years of the first flash. And then there's the ripple effect. Failed states, mass migrations, pandemics in refugee camps, violence over clean water. Can you hear the crack? It's civilization cracking in two, because, unlike fiction, there's no Planet B or Caped Crusader with superpowers who absorbs radiation. There's just US fragile, dependent on electricity, logistics, the simple act of trusting others, some say, but they would never let it get this far. However, remember 2025, wildfires in Canada darkened New York, and many mistook the orange haze for a radioactive cloud. Within hours, chemical attack hashtags went viral, stocks plummeted, and a mad rush for fuel leaked gasoline onto the streets. The chaos didn't require a missile. The perception of a threat was enough. Now imagine this panic amplified by a live round, even an isolated one. Stock exchanges would shut down, cryptocurrencies would collapse due to power outages, supply chains strained by pandemics and conflicts would shatter like thin glass. Still think that's an exaggeration? Ask the residents of southern Ukraine who were left without power for weeks after an attack on a power substation. That was a taste. Finally, the hybrid scenario, failed diplomacy, timid violence, AI, in command, preemptive detection systems already analyze social media, weather and market sentiment, searching for signs of imminent conflict. If they cross a certain threshold, they recommend action. Algorithms learn from past data from a world that has always chosen force as its response. What lesson, then, will the machine extract? The general's letter, the one that paused, the apocalypse, doesn't fit in a spreadsheet. What if the next crisis depends on an AI that judges hesitation as statistical weakness? We will be handing over the future to entities that calculate damage but neither dream nor cry. The abyss is no longer a metaphor. It is a vector in the source code, and if we fall into it, no pixel will offer a hand. So, look beyond the screen and ask, what world is left when the human instinct to doubt is replaced by a command line that only knows execute? Close your eyes for a moment and return to the sound of that dull click that almost signaled the end. Feel the dark room, the cold sweat running down the general's neck, the frantic pulse against the clock that screamed 3 seconds. Now open your eyes and stare at the blue light of your phone notification. Message, endless feed. The distance between the red button and your screen is smaller than you imagine. Just a few taps are enough to spread panic, ignite rumors, push markets to collapse. We call this connectivity. But beneath the soft surface of emojis pulsates the same fragility that made a man tremble in the face of total destruction. We are all in the same room, even without iron bars or sirens, because the bomb today is also information, noise, data flowing unchecked. And the hand that holds this flow is invisible, too fast for the blink of those who still trust in human doubts. Don't think about the stories we tell our children about monsters and heroes. We say that courage is raising the sword. We forget to say That greater courage is lowering the blade when everyone calls for blood. The general taught us this, but who's listening? We live stunned by leaders who confuse bravery with loudness, by timelines that reward extremes, by algorithms that lock us in echo chambers where hesitation seems like weakness. When was the last time you stopped to question an alarming graph, a cropped video, a headline in bold letters? The burst of distrust that saved the world fits at your fingertips, but is crushed by the addiction to instant certainty. If we don't preserve the art of doubt, what chance will we have when another siren sounds? Now look beyond the screens, to the server loads in refrigerated deserts, where LEDs that never sleep glow. Inside, neural networks devour trillions of data points, heat maps, flight patterns, Twitter mood swings, and learn to decide faster than any heart. We call it artificial intelligence, but who taught these systems? It was us, with our history of fear, war, and distrust. Each conflict feeds lines of code, each explosive speech reinforces weights in mathematical matrices. If the next nuclear alarm sounds, the machine might recommend attacking before a human blinks. It won't smell the old leather on the bunker chair, won't hear a mother scream in the hallway, won't remember the sound of rain on a childhood afternoon. And without these ghosts of flesh weighing on the conscience, what force will contain the urge to statistically win the final battle? Let's return to the doubt that held us on the brink of the abyss. The general sensed something off script, the exaggerated silence between alarms, perhaps the memory of a folk song that spoke of dawn. A spark of humanity cracked the protocol, but, in a future of automated decisions, which verse of a song will play on the printed circuit board? Who will carry memories within silicon? Engineers talk of ethics modules, prudence, parameters, but how do we parameterize the shiver that runs down our spines when we imagine vaporizing entire cities? How do we translate into binary the love that makes someone recoil? Without this emotional layer, the process becomes cold calculation, and calculation, by definition, seeks maximum efficiency, not compassion. If hesitation is noise, the algorithm suppresses it. You might say, but AI can save lives, prevent costly mistakes. Yes, it can, like the knife that cuts bread and also wounds. The question isn't whether the technology is good or bad, but who holds the handle when the blade wavers. Look around. How many institutions do you trust to gauge the pulse of a planet on edge? How many times have politicians distorted reports? How many companies hidden risks in colorful spreadsheets? Now replace those faces with closed-source black boxes, processes that no one outside the lab understands, decisions justified in opaque mathematics. Would you sleep soundly knowing that this opacity will decide whether your grandchildren will see the sun tomorrow? We arrive then at the burning question, but what if an AI system decided for him? If the spark that held the general back no longer fits within the protocol, the only option left is to trust the machine's reflection, or demand transparency, restraint, and embedded humanity. This scenario offers no happy ending. It offers a mirror. In it, we see the sweaty face of someone who almost pulled the trigger and the cold glare of a server waiting for commands. Which one will reflect our future depends on the choices we make now, demanding dialogue instead of bravado, investing in treaties instead of warheads, teaching ethics before algorithms, cultivating doubt before certainty, because we may not have another chance to release the button in time. And if we fail, the next click will not be human. It will be irreversible, silent, perfect, and 3 seconds later there will be no one to tell the story.